Welcome to the Vrakas Blum Computer Consulting Sage 100 and 100C 2017 year-end webinar. Today we're going to talk about closing each module, physical inventory counts, 1099 e-filing and reporting, payroll update, and W-2 e-filing and reporting. We appreciate your commitment to learning how to take your Sage 100 to the next level. Thank you for joining us today. Please follow up with us if you would like more detailed training than what we have in the presentation today. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping items. A recording of this presentation will be posted on our website so that you can go back over it if you like later. There will be a question and answer session at the end, and for now, all attendees are in listen-only mode, so feel free to go ahead and eat your lunch. And a special thanks to Jesse Braun and Dana Halpin for presenting today. Jesse Braun is a new consultant with with Vrakas Blum Computer Consulting, but she has several years of experience as an end user with Sage, so she's been through year-end close before. Jesse is a certified technician as well as being certified in Sage Intelligence, and she's experienced with Crystal Reports, Visual Integrator, Custom Office, you name it. And then Jesse has been taking our custom scripting to a whole new level for automation within Sage as well. And with that, I would like to present Jesse to talk about closing the distribution modules.
Thanks, Carol. So first, we're going to look at our order of closing when you are closing your year. This diagram shows the proper module posting process that you should be following, and there's a reason to close your modules in a particular order. For example, your sales order creates invoices which are posted to your accounts receivable. So you want to make sure to close your sales order before you would close your accounts receivable. Oops, sorry, bumped forward here a little bit. There we go, almost. All right, so Sage has an order of closing list. A few things to note about this order. The manufacturing modules don't have a period close, but you want to finish your work in them before moving on to close the distribution modules. Payroll is independent, and it can be kind of a big project, so Dana will talk more about this. Bank reconciliation doesn't have a closing process, but since other modules like accounts receivable, accounts payable, and general ledger close to it, you should close those before moving on to your bank reconciliation. Another way to look at it is to close your modules from the bottom up on your module listing. So first you have your manufacturing modules, then your distribution like sales order, purchase order, inventory, and then finally your core financial with accounts payable, accounts receivable, and general ledger. Of course, the exceptions to this are bank reconciliation and payroll. So now that we've talked about the order, let's get into each module. We're going to go forward and take a look at our purchase order. A year-end closing is largely like a month-end closing, but you want to take a little bit more time to clear up certain things when you're doing your year-end. Sorry. We're losing control of the mouse here. First thing you want to do is balance your purchases clearing report. Purchases clearing checks to make sure that for all purchases, the quantity ordered, quantity received, and quantity invoiced match. So there are many reasons why these three fields might not match, and you should be reviewing them on a regular basis. If you want more information about resolving your purchases clearing, please contact us so we can review the different reasons things would show up there. Generally, our customers balance this monthly or even weekly to stay on top of the transactions. After resolving any issues with your purchases clearing, we can move on to the closing checklist. Sage has a suggested closing checklist for each module, and all of them are very similar. First, you want to make sure that the previous year's purchase orders are entered and updated, including your receipt of goods, receipt of invoice, and returns and issues. Next, review your setup options to make sure that you're retaining the right amount of information. This is especially important during year-end processing, as options in your setup determine how long you retain history data. Any data exceeding your settings will be purged out. And one thing to note here is that if you enter 1 year into your options, it sees 1 year as only the current year. So if you do want to save any history, you should be entering 2 years or more. After reviewing your setup options, you can begin the close process. Make sure to set your accounting date to your period end date. Create a backup. Very important because period end processing can't be undone. So your modules can all be closed together, so you can make only one backup, but you should be making a year-end backup. You want to print your reports, which when performing the close, Sage is going to suggest reports you may want to save. And Paperless Office is a great option for saving your period end reports for further review and for your own documentation. We can assist in setting up Paperless Office if you don't already have it, so just let us know if you do need that. Period end processing is the name Sage gives to any period end close, including your year end. Sage knows when your fiscal year ends based on your setup, and so it will perform appropriate tasks such as purging history based on the number set up in your options. And so here we just have a screen showing you some of the options we've got in purchase order. We can see the days to retain completed purchase orders and your years to retain the purchase history. So we're going to go on to the next. Once you finish purchase order, we're going to move on to sales order. It's very similar to purchase order. First, you want to make sure you have all your invoices entered and updated, review your setup options, and then go through the close process, making sure to run and save your reports. And although you don't have to review purchases clearing here in sales order, there is one thing that you should review in sales order at this time. Year end is a great time to review your sales tax and make sure you have accounted for any upcoming changes. Note that this is not the same thing as your payroll tax table updates, which are done through a separate process. Sales tax is your responsibility to set up, and every customer may have it set up a little bit differently. If you have any issues changing your sales tax, let us know. We'd be happy to assist. If you do use Avalara, sales tax will update for you automatically. You'll know that you have it if you see the word Avalara in your sales tax field instead of anything else. This upcoming year, we have 2 sales tax changes that will be happening in Wisconsin. January 1st, the Brown County sales tax is going to raise 0.5% for a combined rate of 5.5%. And then April 1st, Calumet County is going to do the same thing. So next up in the list, we've got inventory. It's, again, the same kind of process as your sales order and purchase order with some extra checking. Again, it's really important to make your year-end backup before, and it's especially important because you're going to be working on your physical inventory. Many customers choose this as a great time to do a complete physical inventory. Like other modules, first you make sure that you update all of your item transactions. So this would include having your sales order invoices posted, purchase order, receipt of goods, and receipt of invoice posted, and any inventory transactions. Manufacturing transactions should also be completed and posted. Next, you want to make sure that you update your general ledger daily transaction register. So when you compare your inventory to the general ledger, you have all the transactions posted there as well. Print the valuation report to have something to tie to your general ledger later. You can use the regular valuation report if you have a clean cutoff of transactions, or if you continue posting transactions into the next period, the inventory valuation by period report is a great option. Print your stock status report and look for any negative balances. It's a really nice time to make adjustments and correct any negative balances that you have in your inventory. Next, you're going to freeze your items that you want to count and print your count worksheets. Freezing items in Sage creates a separate record of on-hand quantities as of the time of freezing. This allows normal sales and receipts to continue, and it won't change the value of the item until it's unfrozen manually or you complete your physical count. When you're printing your worksheets, there are a lot of options for you to choose so that you can get your worksheets looking the way you like. we do recommend unchecking the box for print quantity on hand and unchecking the box to default the count to the quantity on hand. This forces your users to directly count and enter the number that they find. You may find if you include those checkboxes, items may be missed or users might stop counting once they find the required number on hand. There are two different options for printing your worksheets. We've got the physical count worksheet and the count card worksheet. Count cards can be used where you have the same item in multiple locations, and you might have different users who are counting in each location. Once you have everything counted, users can resume doing transactions in the system. Because you've frozen your inventory, there's no need to hold off while the counts are entered. Next, you'll enter your counts into either the physical count entry or the count card entry. If you did use count card entry, it will allow you to enter the same item multiple times, and it'll add up to a total. Before you update, you want to be sure that you review the variance register looking for items with large negative or positive adjustments. If you only look at your total number, you might miss a mistake that was made or an entry that you will need to review further. Also, make sure to review any zero counts. Zero counts in the entry means that you're adjusting your on-hand quantity to zero, not that you're leaving the on-hand quantity alone. So it's really important to check that out. After doing your physical inventory, the next step is to tie your inventory to the general ledger. You want to make sure you check your posting dates before updating the variance register, and then you're going to tie your inventory trial balance to your general ledger after you do the update. You might also want to take your original valuation report, the one that we printed earlier and saved, and deduct the variance register and tie that to your general ledger. This is really nice for auditors and accountants. They generally want you to do that process as well. So with that done, you go ahead, print your reports, and perform the rest of your period end processing for inventory. And then it's time to move on to your core accounting modules. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol, who's going to talk to you about accounts receivable.
Thank you, Jessie. That was a great summary of the distribution modules. I'm going to talk about the core accounting modules: accounts receivable, accounts payable, and general ledger. So let's start with accounts receivable. The checklist for closing accounts receivable begins with making sure that everything has been entered and updated. This includes invoices and cash receipts. If you send finance charges to your customers, make sure that those are processed and applied. If you send statements, make sure your statements are printed. And if you have accounts receivable customers that are the same as your accounts payable vendors and you have them linked to net the invoices, make sure that you do the AP from AR clearing before closing the accounts receivable module. Then you're ready to balance your accounts receivable to the general ledger. You'll want to use the accounts receivable trial balance to tie out your AR to the general ledger. And the reason for this is because it's based on a posting date and the periods that things post to the general ledger, as well as the ability to go back in time. So if you are not balancing your accounts receivable until the middle of the month, this will still give you month-end balances. Other supporting reports that are very helpful is the general ledger posting recap, where you can look at the detailed transactions that posted over. Now, the aged invoice report is designed to be at a point in time and not to go back to the month end. It can be very helpful, but if you're trying to balance in the middle of the month to the prior month end, it may not tie out. So use the AR trial balance. If your accounts receivable report does not match your accounts receivable balance, there is a knowledge base article, and I'll touch base on that process. We can also send you that if you're interested. So then you're ready to begin the processing. So you'll review your setup options, as Jessie mentioned, to make sure that you're retaining enough history. And then you can go through the close process, set your date, back up, print reports, and close. Now, that knowledge base article that I mentioned to you for accounts receivable is fairly simple. It's more involved for accounts payable. You can find this by going out to the customer portal onto the knowledge base and searching by how to reconcile accounts receivable to the general ledger. Now, notice that it does use the word reconcile. I always forget that and use the word balance, and it doesn't find it as easily. Reconcile is the key word there. The process that it documents in leading you through balancing your accounts receivable is to make sure that everything has been updated and entered, and then at that point you can print the general ledger detail and look at the AR account. Make sure that all the posting entries are from the accounts receivable or sales order module, and if not, investigate those entries. You'll probably need to reverse them and enter them properly. If you still don't balance, it says to review the postings that came from accounts receivable and sales order and make sure that they made it to the general ledger. You can always contact us for assistance. And that brings us to accounts payable. In accounts payable, a lot of our customers set up batch processing. This allows you to open up your mail with the invoices, and any invoices that were from the previous month can be entered into last month's batch. Invoices for the current month can be entered into the current month's batch. When you post them, it posts to the general ledger based on the posting date of the batch, and that's the date that it asks you for before you start running the reports. It does not post based on the invoice date. So when you draw the line and decide that you've got all the invoices you're going to collect, or you've accrued for any big invoices that you have not received, you're ready to begin closing your accounts payable. Make sure that all your transactions have been entered and updated, including invoices, checks, and manual checks. Like accounts receivable, you'll want to use the accounts payable trial balance to tie the accounts payable to the general ledger. You can use the posting recap and the aged invoice report as supporting documents, being aware that the aged invoice report is as of right now. Some people like to print that off right at the end of the month. Now, the knowledge base article, if your accounts payable doesn't tie to your GL, is much more involved in accounts payable. I'll send you a copy of the step-by-step process in case you have any problems with that, and we can also help you walk through that. Once your accounts payable is tied to the general ledger, you're ready to begin the close. So review your setup options for history and go through the close process. Set your date, back up, print your reports, ideally to paperless Office. That makes it a lot easier for storage, and we can help you set that up. And then close using period end processing. Now, the really good news about accounts payable is those 1099s can wait until after close. So enjoy your holidays and deal with it in January. When you're ready to process your 1099s, then the first thing you want to do is review everything and make sure that it's in the system correctly. The vendors that are 1099 vendors would be set up in vendor maintenance and indicated as a 1099 vendor with their taxpayer ID. You will want to select the form for the vendor, whether it's miscellaneous interest or dividend, and select the box. Notice that in Sage 100, it does default to box 1, even though most vendors are paid via box 7. So do pay close attention to that. But don't worry, if you had it defaulting to box 1 and all your payments went into box 1, it's really easy to move that over to box 7. I'll get to that in a moment. While you're reviewing the setup, you also want to make sure that the numbers are correct. You could run the payment history report for the year's totals of what was paid to each vendor, and then go back and just make sure those are right. Now, in vendor maintenance, there's a 1099 history button, and you can use that to correct the balances. Let's take a look at that. So in vendor maintenance, on the additional tab, the 1099 form box is set up so you select the type of vendor that you have and enter their taxpayer ID. That's very important for 1099s. Choose your default box. Now, if you have received consent to send the vendor an electronic 1099 or to email them the 1099, you'll want to check that box. But there is a process that you need to go through in order to receive their consent. If you realize that there is an error in your 1099s and you want to correct it, it's really easy. Click the 1099 history button, and that opens up the 1099 payment history. Notice that it's for each year, so make sure you're in the right calendar year, and that will be based on the default 1099 year, but you can switch to the proper year. And then you may correct the amount that's showing up in there. This doesn't post anywhere, so you're not going to ruin anything, but in case a setup option or an invoice somehow wasn't missed in the setup, it can be easily corrected. So then we're ready to continue the process with the 1099s. You'll want to make sure the IRD is installed, and Dana is going to talk more about the IRD is the interim release download. She'll talk about that more later. You'll go into print or e-file your 1099s, and it will prompt you then to install the forms update if you have not already done so. You may want to practice running your 1099s before you're ready to actually print them. You can do it over and over, and that way you'll have plenty of time to be prompted and install the forms update in case you would like any assistance with that. And then once the whole process is complete, then you'll be prompted and you can increment the default 1099 calendar year. It doesn't delete anything. All the year's history is still there based on your historical setup options. That's just the default year that shows up when you're processing. So the more detailed process of going through your 1099s, it's under Accounts Receivable Reports menu, and it's called Form 1099 E-Filing and Reporting. Don't be thrown off by that title. If you just want to print your 1099s and not e-file it, this is the right place to be. So when you go into there, you'll want to select the form type. So make sure that that's miscellaneous if you're printing miscellaneous forms. And if you want to filter out any vendors that you paid less than $600 to, you can put in that minimum payment amount. It'll default to your default calendar year and bring up your company information. Then you go to the next screen. It'll tell you when you've last printed. And if you want to continue and reprint your 1099s, you can reprint as many times as you want. Or you can start over if this is the first time you're going in to print the 1099s for the year. Just click the Start Over button. That brings you to a series of questions and setup options before we begin. And the first thing that it does is give you a warning. And it's telling us that it's taking all the information from the Accounts Payable module and loading it into the Atrix 1099 payroll forms. You can still correct the information in this area, but it does not go back and write that information to the Accounts Payable module. So you will want to make sure that you go back to Sage and correct it in Sage if you find anything that needs correcting during your review process. The next screen allows you to either select a test drive or to go ahead and just start processing. The test drive is really nice because it makes you feel a little bit more calm about doing this, but since you can reprint and reprint your 1099s over and over, then there's really no problem with going ahead and starting the processing as well. It'll prompt you to verify your taxpayer ID number, and then it'll bring up a screen with the taxpayer identification. So just make sure that your company information is presented properly there. And the next question it asks is if you're completing this for your own company as an employee, or if you are processing 1099s on behalf of a client company. And that is a question as it prints out the 1099 summary that it needs to answer, so that's why it's asking at this point. If there's any state and local tax items, they can be added, so there will be a screen for that. The next question that it asks is if you have any vendors who are going to be receiving your 1099s electronically. That was that checkbox that I showed you before with the process. So if you have a vendor who's approved it and you've checked the box and entered in their email information, you can say yes. Otherwise, if you don't, just say no. Now, if this is the last time that you're going to be printing 1099s for this company, you can say no. For example, if your company was bought out or you're going out of business. Otherwise, if you plan to run 1099s next year, say no to this question. It's not your final return, even if it's your final time through 1099 processing. It'll then ask you if you want to truncate the tax ID numbers for your vendors, and so you have the option to do that. Most people don't. And then it gives you the ability to tell it whether you are a single employer ID or whether there are multiple employer IDs for the 1099s that you're processing. In my demo data, I only have one 1099 for my company, so I said it's a single 1099. Then the process goes through a series of validations. So it will ask you the question in the upper left-hand corner. For example, please check your taxpayer ID numbers and make sure they're all included, as well as being correct for all your vendors. Then it'll ask you to verify the name and address for your vendors, as well as going through a number of other screens to have you validate the data. Again, if you find an error that needs to be corrected, you do need to go back into Sage and make the correction there also. Atrix will give you a screen with an ad where they are trying to cross-sell their services. It's very nice because all the forms are up to date through Atrix. If you'd like to use them, you can. If you find the $199 per payroll, per 1099, is reasonable, go ahead and select that. Otherwise, you want to change from the default. If you just want to print your own 1099s and send them out, choose other options and select the boxes that you want to print. There's no charge for that. The only charge is if you choose to have Atrix do the processing for you, and it will give you a summary of the charges so that you don't accidentally stumble into anything. Then it'll ask you if you want to include divider sheets. I said no. And then it reviews the setup options that you've chosen before you're ready to go ahead and print. So I asked it to print out the 3 forms, the 1099s for my vendor, the summary form that goes along with it, as well as the employer copy of the 1099s. Now, the forms are government certified forms and are acceptable by the government as is. So theoretically, you could print on plain paper. Unfortunately, you do need perforated forms. So it's the 4-part perforated forms, which does have the writing on the back. So you'll want to get blank perforated 4-part forms with the writing on the back for this. And that brings us to a few words about payroll. Now, Dana's going to talk to you about payroll in depth, and I just have a couple of words before talking about general ledger because these are things that you want to do before year end, and it may impact you whether you do outsourced payroll or whether you do payroll in-house. So the first thing is if you have tax on non-cash income. So for example, if you have employees who have group term life insurance in excess of $50,000, there are tables that tell you the imputed income that the employees would have to include in their taxable wages for that group term life insurance. Or if your employees have personal use of company-owned vehicles, that mileage needs to be included as wages. So to set it up in Sage, you would set up an earning code so you only enter the information in once and then tie a deduction code directly to that earning code. That way you put the number in that increases their wages and the deduction pulls it back out again. That way you're not actually paying them because they've already gotten the income. It just includes it in taxable wages. So check the taxation to make sure that the earnings code is taxable and the deduction code is not a pre-tax deduction. Then the employee will have taxable income without receiving real income. But it's very important to do this with a real payroll before the end of the year. And the reason for that is because you need to have some payroll, some money for the employee to absorb that withholding. Otherwise, you may wind up grossing them up for this imputed income and you may not have expected to. So speaking of gross up, then bonuses are an area where a lot of people like to gross things up. First of all, check your earnings code for the gross up. If your tax professional tells you that the bonuses need to be taxed at the supplemental tax rate, just make sure that your earnings code has that indicated. It's just a selection in the earnings code setup. And then if you want the employee to net a certain amount, the formula is very simple. It's simply the amount that they should net divided by 1 minus the tax rate. So for example, if you want them to net a $100 bonus and they're in a 28% tax bracket, then it would be $100 divided by 1 minus 0.28 or $138.89. When you apply that 28% tax bracket, the tax is $38.89 and the employee gets their $100 bonus. If you use Sage to calculate your benefit accruals, do take a look at the setup before you process period end. This is especially important if you're increasing the vacation and sick pay based on employee anniversary edits and not year-end. The reason is because during year-end processing, Sage will go through and review the carryover allowance, and if your vacation is if an employee has accrued 60 hours of vacation and your carryover is 40, it will reduce that 60 to 40. If this is what you want to do, that's fabulous. If it's not what you want to do, then you want to make sure that your setup options are set appropriately, and we can help you out with that too. Year-end is a time when the insurance companies love to increase the rates. So this is easy to push out to all the employees who have those deduction codes. So for example, if your health insurance went to $60, you can enter in $60 and then press apply to push it out to the employees. You can select already applied so that any employee who has this health insurance deduction code will get the rate changed to $60 if you select the standard amount or rate. If you have one deduction code that has multiple rates, then you can also use this to push it out by using the selections below here. So for example, if you have 60 or 120, you can say if the original amount was this, then apply it with this new amount. You can also do the same thing with limits. So for example, with your 401k, the standard limit, when that increases, you can set it up in the deduction code maintenance, click apply, and then select that you want to push it out to employees, but you only want to push out the limit. You don't want to push out any standard rates with them. And again, select already applied for employees who already have that deduction code. Now, do review all your deduction codes, especially because sometimes there's new features. For example, if you have a deduction code that's percentage of gross, you can click the earnings button and see which earnings types that applies to. Dana's going to talk more about the ACA requirements and setting up for employer-sponsored healthcare coverage. The only thing that I wanted to mention was you can make corrections and adjustments in the employee's maintenance by going to the voluntary deduction maintenance and just simply correcting the amount that's there, and that's what will show up on the W-2 then. It's very important to retain perpetual history if you are subject to the Affordable Care Act. However, it's a good idea even if you're not. So you'll want to go to Payroll Setup Options and check the setting for retaining perpetual history. That way it has the details in there. Sometimes with payroll, though, it's really nice to have a backup company because it organizes the information in a bit of an easier way to get to when you're going into the history. Now, everything that I've been talking about is prior to Payroll 2.0. Sage did recently release Payroll 2.0, and it opens up all these limitations so that you don't have to worry about a lot of these things. We'll talk more about that next year because we're just now starting to move our clients over to Payroll 2.0. But it is quite wonderful, and there's lots of webinars and information about that. So other advantages of using an archive company might be that you might want to have a test copy in order to test different things, or you may want to have a backup copy of the company that's easy to get to, as well as if you're doing your W-2 processing later, you may want to save the payroll data in that year for W-2 processing. Again, Dana's going to talk more about that. The steps to copy a company are very simple, but it's extremely important to be really cautious because there's no undo, and you really do not want to copy a test company over your live company. So what you do is you either create a new company code or select the test company that you're going to copy over. You click the copy button and make sure you select the source company and double check it to make sure you have the right source and the right destination company. There's a video clip on our website. You can also find it on YouTube that goes through this process. And we're happy to hold your hand while you do this because it's worth it to make sure that you don't copy your test company to your live company. Other than that, once you got it, it's real easy to make those copies. The downside of making lots of extra copies is that you periodically want to go through and just delete the old unused companies. We usually go through that process when we upgrade you to the newer version too. And so Dana's going to talk more about payroll, but I'll follow up with the general ledger. So now we're ready to do the general ledger close process. A lot of people ask us if they should keep the general ledger open or if they should close it and reopen it because maybe they're done right away in January, but the auditors might be making adjustments into April. And the answer is you can do either. You can either keep the general ledger open and it will produce accurate financials for 1 year into the future. Alternatively, you can close your general ledger and then reopen it later using the setup options. When you do close it, after putting in those adjusting entries, do close with period end processing. It goes through the full process of updating everything to your retained earnings and everything else. So that's very important. However, the period end processing does do a couple of things that may be set at that time. For example, if you have the payroll accruals, or if you have budgets that are automatically created during period end processing, you want to make sure that you're aware that it's creating that new budget for you. Or if you use non-financial accounts, and very few people do, so if you don't know what I mean by non-financial accounts, don't worry about it. But there is a setting that does allow you to reset non-financial accounts with period end processing. So be aware of those three things if you're reclosing it with period end processing. Then go through your balance sheet and balance the way that you normally would. By every account on your balance sheet should have external confirmation for that account. The income statement is really just the net of all your balance sheet balances. So then you'll know at least your bottom line is right. So then you're ready to go through the checklist. Make sure that everything is updated and posted. If you do budget revisions, make sure that those are closed. Some people do allocations in the general ledger. It's a great feature. For example, if you want to take your overhead expense accounts and allocate it to the different divisions based on last month's earnings, there's lots of different options in automatically running those allocations. If you have it set up, don't forget to do your allocations. So then verify that all the other modules are closed before you close the general ledger and go through your close process. Set your date, back up, print your reports, and close using period end processing. And that is the process of going through your period end processing. I am going to turn it over to Dana now to take a deeper dive into the payroll options or into payroll closing. And I'd just like to introduce Dana. She is a very talented consultant that we use really as an extension of our staff. Dana works for Source One, but she's really part of our team. And Dana has been a Sage 100 computer consultant since 2008. She's extremely knowledgeable and does a great job with all things within Sage, as well as helping with business process reviews and consulting. She does a lot of our Sage intelligence reporting and as well as other support and report writing. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dana.
Thank you, Carol. Welcome to this portion of the payroll year-end webinar. Today we're going to talk about our payroll updates and what's required, our payroll year-end and closing considerations, the Atrix e-filing and reporting, the W-2s, ACA reporting, and then we're going to give you some resources to go to with any questions that will help you. So what product updates are required to do the year-end processing? We have a list right here of all versions of Sage and what product updates are required. Just to note that if you are on version 2015, this is the last year that you'll be able to utilize the Sage year-end processing. You will need to update your program during the next year in order to go forward with tax table updates and IRDs, etc. So if you're not sure about the version that you're on in Sage 100, all you need to do is go to Help and About, and it'll tell you in there. When it comes to year-end updates, we have two of them. It is the tax table update and the IRD. the tax table update for 2018 quarter one is something that you will be needing to do your first year's payroll. And the 2017 interim release download is necessary to process all the W-2s and forms that are required for year-end. The estimated target date is December 20th, but this is subject to change. When it comes to e-filing and reporting, you're going to use a program called Atrix, which you saw with the 1099s that Carol presented. That year-end update is expected to be around December 21st or so. So in order to do all your year-end processing for 2017, you're going to need the 2017 IRD, the Atrix year-end update, and all those must be installed for your W-2s, ACA, 1099s for 2017. On this chart here, we're talking about supported versions again, but pay attention to the box in red. That will show you what version, well, actually what date your version will be, the payroll subscription for year-end updates and IRD will be expiring. It's pretty easy to follow. If you know your version, just add 2 years. Sage usually provides 2 years worth of IRDs and year-end updates before you are required to update. And then, as we discussed before, this is the last year for Sage 2015. If you're looking to upgrade, please contact us. We can help you with that and walk you through the payroll, new version of payroll and how to set it up and so forth. So when you are ready to go into year-end processing, what is reset? You're going to need to look at all of your options and payroll setup options to see if there is any areas that is reset, as well as your deductions and so forth. So we have pension plan deductions, cafeteria plan, allocated tips, fringe benefits, non-qualified plan, and dependent care benefits. Those are all reset. You need to check the setup for that, as well as all your quarterly and yearly reports default back to 0. Your check history is removed. Your perpetual history is removed. And this is all based on your system settings, of course, how many years you are retaining, and if you have perpetual history turned on. Your terminated employees are purged based on those settings and setup, and the standard deduction with goals are, if they're met, those are purged as well. So very important to go into your payroll setup. There's payroll options, there's deduction code maintenance, earnings code maintenance. All those menus will need to be reviewed before you press that process period end for the year. What do you need to consider before you close? We recommend creating an archive company after the last 2017 payroll. This is solely because the payroll module is based on a calendar year and it does not have any future periods. And we cannot post with a check date in a future period until the current quarter is closed. Full period end processing, we reset the quarter to date and year to date employee fields to 0, as we mentioned before as well. So very important to create that archive company. It will give you many benefits, especially in regards to timing as when you're printing your W-2s. The payroll close process. This is our suggested payroll close process. The first step, of course, is to install the 2017 year-end IRD, and that could possibly be done this week if we have those updates on the Sage website available to us. Then you're going to balance your payroll to your period end, do all your reconciling for period to date and year to date, make a good backup, print reports. Carol went through a more detailed of how to balance the payroll module and reports as well. The next step would be to copy the live company to an archive company. And then in that live company, you're going to close your period using period end processing. Once you have closed the period, you're ready to do your first payroll. But before you do that, and make sure to install the first quarter 2018 tax table update. Then process your New Year's payroll. After that, you install your 2017 fourth quarter tax table update. And the reason for this is because tax table updates are global, and you're going to need to set it back to 2017 to be able to process your W-2s in the archive company. Once the W-2s are finalized and processed, you're ready to go back to your 2018 first quarter tax table update, so that'll be needing to be installed as well. The deadline to file W-2s is January 31st. We strongly recommend that you send your forms as early as possible to your employees, and then this is solely to avoid time to identify changes and avoid processing fees and corrections. So we have the ATREX and e-filing portion right now. The ATREX program is available to you if you're current on your maintenance. You are alerted each quarter to update your forms. They change about 20% quarterly. All your reports are updated within a single click. That's done all over the web. And it's a seamless integration with your payroll data. It's fully integrated with Sage 100. You can print your forms to perforated or plain paper. There's about 250 payroll form sets, including 400 forms within those sets. And like I mentioned, you have to be active and current on your plan in order to utilize these features. So when you go into period end menu off of payroll, you have the federal and state tax reporting. If this window pops up called Forms Update, that means that you will need to update your forms. So you have the ability to do the automatic update, which is what we recommend. You can, if this is not something that you're able to do over the internet, you can always download the update and do it later. But we really haven't seen too many problems with the automatic update, which is really quick and easy to do. When it comes to printing W-2s, you're going to see the form ID listed here. It'll say 2017 for this year. You're going to choose the W-2, W-3 form, and I'm in the Federal E-Filing and Reporting menu. And once you select the form, you're going to fill out all the appropriate information here. Sure to include your W-2 and box 14 selections at the bottom. When you have verified and entered all this information, when you click accept, the wizard will begin. Now the wizard is something that looks similar to an Excel worksheet. This is just an example of one. The information at the top is verify the employee information and then click next step. So any step that is needed is explained at the top, and then you have the ability to go right to the next step. So the information is filled in from your payroll data. If there is an error or something is wrong, it'll show up in red, and you will need to correct it in order to move forward. The information can be processed using a test drive, and Carol mentioned that as well for the 1099s, but as she mentioned, I'll just reiterate, a test drive probably isn't necessary because you are always able to reprint your W-2s. If you make a change in here into the numbers, the data, you will be able to do so. However, that data is not written back to your Sage 100 company. So the wizard goes through a series of validations. Errors are identified. Once you have gotten through the whole process, you come up to your filing options. The filing options are similar to what you saw for 1099. The second half of the screen is where you would print your 1099s on your own. The top is if you wanted Atrix to do it. Cost is $0 if you print them on your own. We have a lot of questions about this. People see this and they think that they have to pay for the process, but it's really a zero cost to you if you just check these boxes here at the bottom. What forms are needed? For an employee W-2, you're going to need the copy B, C, and 2 copies of copy 2s. These must be printed on blank 4-part perforated paper with the notice on the back. For the federal W-2, copy A is required, and you can print that to plain paper. For the federal W-3, you can print that to plain paper as well. The state copy, blank 4-part perforated paper is needed. The employer W-2D prints on 4 per sheet to plain paper or a blank 4-part perforated form. Forms can be ordered from Sage Checks and Forms, as well. Some people like to receive their W-2s electronically. There's a couple steps in regards to setting that up. Once again, we're in the federal e-filing and reporting menu. On those, you'll see an electronic W-2 consent that must be printed and signed. You can receive it on paper or electronically in order to alert the system that the employee has signed up for electronic filing. You would go to your Payroll main menu, Employee Maintenance. On the Tax Status tab, you will see this checkbox here. If that is checked, the electronic only field is, if it is checked, the W-2 1099 preparer window will recognize this and process your W-2 electronically. So let's go in and talk about our ACA, who's required to report and what forms that you will need. When it comes to ACA reporting, employers with 50 or more full-time employees or 50 full-time equivalent employees will be subject to ACA reporting. This will give you information as far as what form and who is required to report. If you are not self-insured versus if you're self-insured, depends on what form you would need to process as well as how many employees. There's situations that impact this, such as hours worked, participation in a controlled or aggregate group, seasonal workers, transitions for new employers. Make sure you review the IRS requirements carefully. Employers will be required to track info for the employee dependent coverage by month, and we'll show you how to do that within Sage 100. So Sage is compliant with the ACA reporting because they report on the total number of employees, the total number of full-time employees, the total number of full-time equivalents, and the average hours worked by employee per calendar month. Before you begin processing for ACA, there's some questions or requirements needed. Are you on a supported product update? Do you have the 2017 IRD installed? Is Perpetual history checked? Do you have rights and role maintenance to get into the ACA screens? Is Atrix installed, and are you current on your maintenance? If you meet all those requirements, you're ready to enter in your employer and employee data for reporting. So in Sage 100, you will notice in Payroll there is a separate ACA menu. In that menu, you have what we call ACA Employer Maintenance. Once you choose this, you have two options on the upper right-hand corner. You have monthly and other members. The monthly detail is the button to enter information for each month, which we're going to go over in detail next. Down here in the bottom left, we have the ALE member part of aggregate group. If this box is checked, then the other members button will become active and you can click on it. If there are any other company EINs to include in the same group, you will want to click on and set up other members. So once you click that monthly detail button, this will be the screen that comes up. You have three different sections here on entering data. The first column is your minimum essential coverage. You're going to select this box if your company offers a full-time employees an opportunity to enroll in employer-sponsored health care plan that meets the ACA minimum essential coverage requirements. So it's just a checkbox that you turn on. The next column is the full-time employee count, which is next to it is the total employee count. Those two columns will be updated from your ACA applicable large employer report, which we'll go over in a little bit. So I mentioned before there was another option. I'm sorry, we're going over the ACA applicable large employer report next. So in here, it is offered as a self-help tool. Sage does not see any accuracy or applicability to your circumstances. It is a report that complies with the ACA requirements. Your hours of service must be tracked by month, as we know, and hours worked are tracked by pay periods in Sage 100, and pay periods may span more than 1 month. So in this report here, you put in your dates, you can exclude certain earnings, and then the report will generate based on the data that you have in the system. So after you set up the ACA for employers, it's necessary to set up the employees. For employees, we have employee maintenance and payroll that has the ACA button. The first screenshot up here is the button appears on the right. This is for versions that are Sage 2017 and below. The screenshot at the bottom, the ACA employee button, is on the upper right-hand corner. It's just changed a little bit on how it looks. Once you go into the employee maintenance, you will see at the top a couple different choices. You have the monthly detail and covered individuals. Your monthly detail button is laid out here for you. It is the offer of coverage per month. So what we have is the first column, you choose the offer of coverage. There's a whole list of codes in here available to you. The next column is your employee share of lower cost, which is the lowest cost monthly premium for self-only minimal essential coverage, providing minimal value that is offered to the employee. If the employee is not required to contribute towards the premium, you're just going to enter 0. And then the last column is your 4980H Safe Harbor. You have a whole list of options here as well to choose from. And if you need explanation of what those choices are, we certainly can help you with that. So that second button was called Covered Individuals. In the Covered Individuals box will become active if you click on Provide Self-Insured Coverage. Once this is checked, you click on Covered Individuals, and then the bottom screen here is a screenshot of what you will see. So the Provide Self-Insured Coverage is if the employee enrolled in an employer-sponsored self-insurance health coverage offered by your company during any part of the calendar year. Down here we have a box that says if they were covered all months. You're going to select that box if the individual was covered for at least 1 day in every month of the year. You're going to clear that box if the individual was not covered for at least 1 day in every month. Then you have all the months laid out. You can determine whether or not you check a box if the individual was covered for at least 1 day in every month of the year. You're going to select the box. If the individual was not covered at least 1 day in that month, you're going to clear the box. And you're going to need to fill this out for every person who was covered, including the employee. So the two forms that are required for ACA are the 1094 and the 1095. We have them listed on our Form ID. These can be printed to plain paper. No perforated paper is required, or no pre-printed paper is required. When you go through the process and hit accept, a wizard will come up similar to what we saw for the W-2s. And just a note that a 1095 form will be generated for all employees who have entered in that monthly detail or covered individual screen information. So you will need to create a contribution deduction if you're reporting ACA. This is in the deduction code maintenance and payroll. You create a new deduction code and use the employer contribution type. You could enter in DD in the box code 12 field. If you do have 2 or more deductions that use box 12, those amounts will be added together. So some people were asking if the W-2, if it means that the coverage is taxable, and the answer to that is no. This is just for informational purposes. So Carol did mention that the future ahead is upgrading to Payroll 2.0. This is a really great time saver for people who have been on payroll for quite some time, know that there's some pain points that in the way the process is now. You won't need to create any more archive companies. The history will be saved because it's going to be on a business framework network. And the tax table updates are done through the Internet Payroll Service. So there's going to be a lot of advantages to upgrading to Payroll 2.0. Please contact us to discuss your options and a timeline for when you want to get onto this new feature. As far as resources go, we will definitely be your main resource. However, you can go on to Sage City. They have an excellent year-end center. I provided the website address up here, and then these are the items that you can look forward to seeing on there. We have the interactive year-end payroll and AP checklist. They have the ability to print those lists, hot topics, a great year-end forum, knowledge-based articles, year-end videos, a lot on ACAs on there as well. So some areas require an active Sage business care plan to access, but these are really great resources for your year-end processing needs. So that concludes this portion of the webinar. I'll turn it back over to Carol, and we can see if there's any questions that need to be answered.
Thank you, Dana. That was a great explanation of the payroll year-end processing. And so that concludes our presentation. A recording of this presentation will be posted on our website, so you can go over it and go back again and again if you'd like. And we will send an email letting you know when that has been posted up on our website and the link to find it. So you can feel free to let us know if you have any additional questions. There was one question that was asked during the broadcast, and that was what reports are in period report menus that you would not be able to access on any given date. And the answer is none. It's kind of a double negative there. All of the reports that Sage suggests that you go through and print during the period end process are just standard reports in Sage, and they're just suggested reports that you've probably already printed in your balancing process. So there's nothing special or magical there. Now, if anyone else has any questions, please raise your hand and I will unmute you, or feel free to type in your question and then we can read it off and answer it as well. And if there aren't any questions, and again, feel free to email the questions too, or if you'd like some additional assistance with any of these areas, we're very happy to help you out. So good luck with year-end close, and we look forward to working with you. Thanks. Bye-bye.